consider myself a fan of horror movies. Slashers, monsters, vampires, you name it. But there's one movie I avoided for years. With just watching a few seconds of it when I was a kid, left a mark of pure horror on me that I never wanted to confront. This movie is considered by many as the scariest movie of all time. That movie is... Despite my love for the horror genre, The Exorcist became sort of a personal taboo for me. A movie that I always steer clear of, mainly because of my Christian upbringing, where I used to believe that watching that film meant letting something from that demonic world enter my mind. That is why every time someone mentioned The Exorcist, I honestly felt like a shiver down my spine, as if the movie's demons were waiting to torment me if I dared to face them. Years went by, but recently, something changed. In honor of its 50th anniversary, the film had a theatrical re-release. So I was presented with a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to witness a horror movie masterpiece for the first time, just as it was meant to be, on the big screen. As a movie buff, this aspect won out over my deeply rooted fear. And without giving it a second thought, I bought a couple of tickets. It was time to face the fears of my childhood and find out if the movie lived up to its legendary reputation. Just like many of you watching this video, I was born in a world where The Exorcist was already a classic, and even though I hadn't seen it, I knew what it was about due to the countless parodies and references in pop culture.
Guess what? It's not that compelling.
So I doubted that the movie could actually surprise me. Boy, was I wrong. The first thing that pleasantly surprised me is that the movie isn't about the exorcism or the girl Regan McNeil as I had always believed. And thankfully, it's not a jump scare fest like many modern horror films. Instead, I found that The Exorcist is a slow-paced movie that delves into themes like the loss of faith, the weight of guilt, and the nature of evil, with a narrative that cares about building meaningful relationships between the characters, so by the time the exorcism takes place, we're so deeply immersed in the story that we genuinely worry about what will happen to Regan and the priest's battle in evil, where the innocent soul of a little girl is at stake. The film works brilliantly due to the direction of the great late William Friedkin, one of the boldest directors to have ever lived. I honestly believe that The Exorcist would have been just another generic horror movie in the hands of another director, whether it's for his unorthodox methods like shooting the exorcism sequence in sub-zero temperatures, firing a gun to bring out a visceral reaction from the actor Jason Miller, or designing tracking shots before the invention of the Steadicam. Friedkin didn't just create a legendary horror movie, he made a great movie, period. In my opinion, it's also the best acted horror movie I've ever seen. It's no wonder why it was the first horror movie to be nominated for an Oscar for Best Picture. Of course, the film is most remembered for its insane third act, but it works so well because of the entire build-up that involves the real protagonist of the movie, Father Karras.
I need reassignment, Tom. I want out of this job. It's wrong. It's no good.
We get to know him as someone who serves as both as a priest and a psychiatrist, trying to balance two worlds that seems to antagonize with each other, the spiritual and the profane. This struggle shakes Karras to his core, so much so that he seems to believe he's not performing on his job well, leading him to a crisis of faith. He also carries an immense guilt due to his mother's death, thinking he could have done more for her due to his financial limitations and even negligence. That's a pretty terrifying feeling for anyone, and that's where the real horror of the movie lies. If we also consider that, on the other hand, the script also takes time to establish the relationship between Chris and Regan, it's heartbreaking to see how a mother witnesses the gradual transformation of her loving daughter into the literal embodiment of evil. It speaks to an incalculable fear, the helplessness of a parent in the face of their child's suffering. But let's not forget about the key aspect. We all know that seeing children in horror movies is commonplace today, but back in the 70s, this was uncommon and truly shocking, considering the infamous things Regan says and does. We are witnessing a perversion of innocence unfolding before our very eyes. That is why the ending is so impactful, because all of these elements converge in a scene where, without the assistance of any kind of musical score, which only makes it more terrifying, we see Karras being confronted by the demon, who throws his mistakes and guilt in his face, reminding him of how he couldn't do anything to save his mother. But in the end, Karras, in an act that sees him regain his faith and confront the demon and his demons head-on, decides to sacrifice his life for an innocent soul rather than being just a bystander. All of this is much scarier than watching demons, jump scares, or a possessed little girl spinning her head around and shooting out green vomit. But that's not something to scoff at either. As a matter of fact, about 6 people left the theater I was in during that scene, which made me feel like the people who watched it in the 70s, seeing how others reacted in extreme ways. It wasn't quite the same, but it made the whole thing feel very special. As soon as the credits start rolling with that black background and blood red typography, I can say that I had a transformative experience. I laughed, I was horrified, but above all, I had a blast witnessing a true cinematic gem and finally overcoming the fears that haunted my childhood. I can tell you that watching The Exorcist on the big screen was a challenge that was truly worth it, and it has allowed me to see it as much more than just a horror movie, but as one of the greatest films of all time. Not only have I lost my fear of The Exorcist, but it has become a movie that I will never forget, one that has redefined my relationship with the horror genre as one capable of exploring the depths of the human condition. And also, it has filled the gap in my collection that I never thought it would be filled.